The forest was a living thing, breathing quietly beneath the heavy summer sun, its tangled limbs whispering secrets older than the town itself. I had always known the stories, like every child in Briar's Hollow. Every summer, a child vanished into those dense woods, swallowed by shadows and silence, only to return a full year later, and then, just 30 minutes after that return, another child would emerge, eyes blank, face pale, and footsteps slow and hollow. The cycle had been going on for decades, woven into the fabric of this cursed place like an endless nightmare. But knowing the story, hearing the whispered warnings over campfires, was nothing compared to standing at the edge of those woods, watching the sunlight filter through the trembling leaves, knowing that soon, it would be someone's turn. This summer, it was my little sister, Emma. I remember the morning like a fractured dream. The air was thick with humidity, sticky against skin and heavy with the scent of pine and earth. Emma had that restless energy kids have, the kind that never sits still, that makes you feel like something's about to happen. She begged me to come with her, to explore deeper into the forest than ever before, but I knew better. Every adult in Briar's Hollow had tried to keep us away, but curiosity, that damnable curiosity, pulled her anyway. Her small hand slipped from mine before we reached the forest's boundary, and I watched her disappear beneath the thick canopy, swallowed by shadows. Hours passed. I stayed by the edge, heart hammering with every rustle and snap of twigs. The trees seemed to lean closer, their dark branches like grasping fingers. The forest breathed, alive with unseen eyes watching, waiting. I shouted her name, my voice breaking and lost in a heavy stillness. When night fell, the town's lights flickered uncertainly, and neighbors gathered. We scoured the woods, flashlights cutting pale beams through the blackness, calling, searching, hoping against the dread growing in our guts. But the forest held its secrets tight. Days dragged on. The summer heat faded into something colder, shadows lengthening as if the forest itself grew hungrier. Then, exactly 1 year from the day Emma vanished, something impossible happened. 30 minutes after midnight, on the edge of the same woods, a child emerged. Not Emma, but another child, a boy we'd last seen a year ago. His eyes were glassy, empty, and his skin ghostly pale. He walked as if sleepwalking, lips moving silently in a chant no one could hear. We watched in terrified silence. That was the beginning. I knew then the forest wasn't just a place of trees and shadows, it was a living nightmare, an ancient curse woven through our town's history. The cycle would continue, year after year, child after child, forever trapped in that endless exchange between light and darkness. And I would do anything to stop it. The morning after the boy's slow emergence from the forest, Briar's Hollow felt suffocated beneath a thick, oppressive silence. The usual hum of cicadas, the distant laughter of children playing, everything had retreated as if the woods had swallowed the very breath of the town. I walked the cracked sidewalks with my head low, clutching the worn leather strap of my backpack like a lifeline. People passed by, faces pale and tight-lipped, eyes darting toward the shadows of the trees that hemmed the town on all sides. No one spoke of the boy who had come back. It was as if naming him aloud would pull the nightmare closer. I wanted to scream at them all. How could they pretend nothing was happening? How could they act like the endless cycle wasn't devouring us from the inside? At home, the silence was worse. Emma's room was untouched since she vanished. Her favorite doll lay abandoned on the bed, its glassy eyes staring into nothingness. I reached out to touch it and recoiled as if burned. The air felt heavier there, thick with memories and unspoken fear. That day, I sat for hours by her window, staring out toward the edge of the forest. I could almost see the shadows move, twisting and writhing like living things just beyond sight. That night, sleep refused me. The dark corners of my room seemed to pulse and breathe. Whispers slithered beneath the walls, half-heard words, distant laughter, a child's sob barely held in check. My heart pounded as if trying to break free from my ribs. I forced my eyes shut, but the darkness behind my eyelids was not empty. It was the forest. Endless trees stretching out like black fingers, roots twisting into mouths that whispered my name. The ground beneath me shifted like living flesh. I was falling, deeper into an abyss without bottom. When I woke, I didn't know if hours or seconds had passed. The sun was a dull glow, barely penetrating the curtains. On my desk lay a folded piece of paper I didn't recognize. With trembling hands, I unfolded it. Written in jagged, hurried script were 3 words: "Don't look back." I didn't know who had left it, or why. But I knew, somehow, deeply, in the marrow of my bones, that the forest was calling me. It was waiting. And if I didn't find answers soon, I might be next. The cycle was not just about disappearance. It was about transformation. About losing yourself piece by piece until all that remained was a shadow, a husk trapped between worlds. I had to know what happened in the forest. I had to understand the hunger beneath the leaves. That night, I packed a small bag, water, a flashlight, my pocket knife, and slipped out under a sky swallowed by clouds. The air was thick and cold, the usual summer heat replaced by a creeping chill that wrapped around me like a shroud. The edge of the forest loomed ahead, dark and silent. As I stepped beneath the canopy, the world seemed to close behind me. The trees whispered. Not with leaves, but with voices. Soft, low murmurs that twisted and curled around my thoughts. I forced myself to keep walking. Each step felt heavier, as if the ground itself resisted me. Suddenly, I stumbled on something. A child's shoe, half buried in the dirt. I knelt, heart pounding, and saw it was worn and faded, as if left untouched for years. Next to it, a carving on a tree, a circle enclosing a strange symbol I didn't recognize, like a twisted spiral, bleeding downward. A warning. Or a mark of possession. The forest seemed to pulse with a dark energy, alive and watching. I wanted to turn back. But the whispers called me deeper. And somewhere, far beneath the trees, I heard a soft sobbing. The sobbing wasn't like any child's cry I had ever heard. It was raw and ragged, slipping through the dense air like smoke escaping a dying fire, half in pain, half in mourning. I couldn't tell if it was nearby or far away, just a breath out of reach, as if the forest itself was crying for its lost children. I moved cautiously, each step muffled by a carpet of rotting leaves and tangled roots that snaked beneath my boots. The flashlight flickered against the gnarled bark, casting shadows that leapt like hungry beasts, threatening to engulf me. The heavy silence was pierced only by that impossible sound, sobbing, echoing, calling. I followed it. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to close in on me. The trees twisted unnaturally, their branches intertwined so tightly they blotched out the moonlight completely. The air grew cold and thick, each breath a struggle, as if I was swimming through unseen water. My mind started playing tricks, shapes flitting at the edge of my vision, whispers curling like smoke around my ears. I tried to steady my thoughts, but a creeping dread gnawed at my resolve. Then I saw it. A clearing, bathed in pale moonlight, but grotesquely alive. The ground was covered in tangled roots, black and slick, like veins pumping some dark life beneath the earth. In the center, a small figure crouched, rocking back and forth, hands clutching its head as if trying to hold its thoughts together. The sobbing came from her. I froze, heart hammering. The girl, she was covered in dirt and bruises, her hair matted and wild, lifted her head. Her eyes met mine, wide and vacant, pupils dilated into darkness. "Help me," she whispered, voice cracked and ragged. But something wasn't right. I stepped closer, the forest seeming to pulse with a slow, sickening heartbeat. "Who are you? How did you get here?" She didn't answer. Instead, the ground beneath her seemed to ripple, like the roots themselves were breathing. Suddenly, she screamed, a chilling, blood-curdling sound that shattered the silence and sent a flock of crows into the sky, their black wings blotting out stars. And then the world shifted. The trees bent and swayed even though there was no wind. The shadows stretched and writhed like living things. The roots twisted, wrapping around the girl's ankles, pulling her down into the earth. I reached out to help, but my hands passed through her like smoke. She was fading, slipping from one world to another. No! I shouted, panic choking my throat. But the forest only whispered back. I stumbled back, breath ragged. The clearing dissolved, replaced by endless trees, eyes watching from the dark. And in the distance, the sobbing began again, haunting, endless. I realized then, the children who vanished weren't just lost. They were trapped, caught in a web between this world and something darker, something ancient. The forest was a prison, and its walls were alive. I had to find a way to break the cycle. But the forest wasn't done with me. The moment I turned from the clearing, the forest changed. The trees no longer stood tall and proud, they twisted grotesquely, their bark peeling like scabs, revealing raw, pulsating wood beneath. The air grew thick with the scent of decay and something sour, like burnt flesh. My flashlight flickered erratically, struggling against the suffocating darkness that pressed in on every side. The whispers returned, louder now, snatches of words I couldn't understand, or perhaps dared not. Return. Return. Step by step, the ground beneath me shifted unnervingly. The roots I'd seen before weren't just in the clearing, they crawled, stretched, pulsed beneath the earth like veins pumping a dark poison. Occasionally, a root would writhe above the dirt, twitching like a serpent, as if sensing my presence. I felt watched, hunted. I tried to steady my breath but found it growing shallow, my chest tightening as a cold sweat broke out across my skin. The weight of the forest was crushing. Not just physical, but mental. Memories surfaced unbidden, twisted and fragmented. Emma's smile, the way she'd laughed just days before she vanished, then the boy who emerged a year later, his hollow eyes reflecting something so empty it felt like a void gnawing inside me. Then came the visions. I blinked, and the trees shifted into faces, twisted, screaming masks etched into bark, their mouths moving in silent screams. The leaves became fluttering hands, reaching for me, trying to pull me in. My mind shattered like glass. Suddenly, I was falling, tumbling through darkness, the forest's voice a thunderous roar in my ears. You belong here. You belong. I grasped at something, anything, but found only air. I landed hard on cold, damp earth, heart racing. My flashlight shattered, plunging me into total darkness. Panic clawed its way up my throat. In the void, I heard a whisper. Do you see? Do you understand? A breath. A heartbeat. The cycle is endless. The children are the forest, and the forest is them. I screamed into the blackness, but the voice only laughed, low, cruel, ancient. I forced myself to stand, hands trembling. My thoughts scrambled to make sense, but the lines between reality and nightmare blurred, and I felt myself slipping. Was this the forest's hunger? Or my own mind fracturing under the weight of truth? Then, faint light flickered ahead, an opening, or a trap. I had no choice but to follow. The deeper I went, the more I felt Emma's presence, no longer as a child, but as a part of the forest itself, a voice in the whispers, a shadow beneath the leaves. I knew then that to save her, to save any of them, I would have to confront the darkness consuming the roots, and myself. The pale light ahead was no sanctuary. It flickered like a dying flame, casting twisted shadows that danced on the tree trunks. I staggered toward it, heart pounding, every nerve screaming for escape, yet something rooted me there, a dark fascination, a desperate need to see what lay beyond. As I drew closer, the forest opened into a shallow pool, its surface unnervingly still, like glass. But the water wasn't clear. It shimmered with strange colors, swirling beneath the surface, pulling me in with a gravity I couldn't resist. I knelt, staring into it. At first, I saw only my reflection. pale, trembling, eyes wide with terror. But then the image shifted, fractured, splitting into multiple versions of myself, each more distorted than the last. One smiled cruelly, a grin that wasn't mine. Another wept silent tears, face dissolving into shadows. A third stared blankly, empty as the forest's hollow children. I reached out, fingertips trembling as they brushed the water. Ripples broke the surface, and with them, a whisper. "We are you, and you are us." The voices from the forest filled my head, overlapping with these fractured reflections. Memories and nightmares twisted together, indistinguishable. Emma's laughter echoed, warped into a chilling mockery. The boy from last year's cycle appeared beside me in the water's depths, eyes hollow yet accusing. I gasped and stumbled back, my mind reeling. The forest wasn't just consuming children. It was fracturing their very souls, and mine. I felt pieces of myself slipping away, lost among the shadows, replaced by something cold and foreign. Each breath tasted like ash, each heartbeat thudded like a death knell. I heard the whispers again, now clearer, almost coaxing. "Join us. Become the forest. Be free from pain." The temptation clawed at me, promising release from the suffocating fear, from the endless loss. For a moment, I almost believed it. But a sliver of resistance flickered inside. Emma's face, sharp and defiant in my mind. The memory of her small hand slipping from mine at the forest's edge, the warmth of her laugh beneath the summer sun. I clenched my fists, willing myself not to drown in the shadows. The forest pulsed around me, alive and waiting. I was no longer sure where I ended, and it began. The forest was no longer just around me. It had burrowed inside my mind, threading its dark roots through every fragile thought. Each breath I took tasted thick and metallic, as if my lungs were filling with ancient, rotting earth. My skin prickled with a chill that wasn't from the night air but something darker, a creeping cold that seeped from the marrow of my bones. I stumbled forward, unsteady on feet that felt both foreign and my own. The pool of water I'd found in the clearing haunted my vision like a mirror of despair. It hadn't just reflected me, it reflected them. The fractured versions of myself, the lost children, the hollow-eyed boy. Each face twisted and screamed silently, a chorus of pain echoing beneath the surface. The whispering was no longer distant. It surrounded me, thick and suffocating, like a fog made of voices. They spoke not in words but in emotions, cold dread, aching sorrow, maddening confusion, flooding my mind with 1,000 unbearable feelings all at once. I clasped my head, desperate to silence the storm inside. Then came the scent. A sickly sweetness, faint but undeniable, decayed flowers, damp moss, and the unmistakable coppery tang of blood. It drifted on the night air, thickening with every step I took. The forest itself seemed to bleed, dark sap oozing from the bark like fresh wounds. I forced my way deeper, past tangled roots that twisted like serpents, reaching for me, grasping at my ankles and wrists. I yanked free, my skin tearing on the coarse bark. Pain was sharp and immediate. A brutal reminder that I was still human. But how much longer? In the shadows between trees, I glimpsed movement, fleeting, silent. Figures just beyond clear sight, watching, waiting. Children? Or something else? Their eyes glinted in the dark, hollow and endless. One stepped forward, a girl, no older than Emma had been when she vanished. Her face was smeared with dirt, her eyes too large and too black. "Come with us," she whispered, voice like the rustle of dead leaves. A sudden chill ripped through me, paralyzing. My mind screamed to run, to fight, but my legs refused to obey. The girl reached out a hand, and the shadows stretched toward me like grasping fingers. Then the forest shifted again, the ground beneath me trembled, and the trees bent lower, forming a suffocating canopy that blotted out the moon and stars. The whispers became screams, raw and desperate. I fell to my knees, head spinning, vision blurring. In the madness, I saw her. Emma. Or at least the shadow of her, flickering like a broken flame. Her eyes locked onto mine, filled with sorrow and warning. "Don't lose yourself," she mouthed, voice silent but sharp as a blade. I clawed at the earth, desperate to hold on to whatever part of me remained. But the forest was relentless, pulling at the edges of my sanity. The voices pressed closer, promising oblivion, release, unity. "Join us. Be whole. Be free." But the madness was a void. A hunger. And I was beginning to understand, some parts of the forest would never let go. Every step forward felt like sinking into quicksand. The forest breathed, slow, heavy inhales and exhales that shook the ground beneath me. The trees no longer just watched, they leaned in, their branches whispering secrets I couldn't quite grasp. The air pulsed, thick and warm, like the lungs of some ancient beast exhaling from beneath the soil. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it would burst free from my chest, echoing in my ears like a warning drum. I stumbled into another clearing. This one was smaller, encircled by trees so close their bark melded together into a wall of rough skin. The ground was littered with pale bones, fragments of ribs, skull shards stained dark with dirt and something worse. I swallowed hard. My skin crawled with a primal terror. I recognized the shapes. Children's bones. The remnants of the vanished. The whispers sharpened into voices, urgent, pleading, angry. They cut through my mind like icy knives. "Remember, find the truth, free us." A cold wind rose, carrying faint, broken laughter that sent chills crawling down my spine. I sank to the ground, overwhelmed. The forest wasn't just a place. It was a prison for souls, and I was beginning to see its cruel design. The cycle wasn't random. The forest fed on their fear, their pain, their very essence. And in return, it gave them back, shadows twisted into hollow mockeries of life. I rubbed my face, trying to hold on to myself, but my reflection in a nearby pool shattered. It fractured into 1,000 shards, each showing a different version of me, some terrified, some wild-eyed with madness, others eerily calm and hollow. Was I becoming them? Or were they becoming me? I shivered as the whispering grew louder, almost deafening now. I covered my ears, but the voices burrowed deeper. "Join us, join us, join us," I screamed, a raw, guttural sound that tore through the night. The forest responded. The ground trembled and the roots writhed like serpents, twisting toward me, curling around my legs and arms. The bark of the trees cracked and bled sap that smelled of iron and rot. I fought to break free, the roots tightening with a cold, crushing grip. My vision blurred, darkness creeping over the edges. Then I felt it, a flicker of something deep inside, a spark of defiance. I pushed back, pulling and tearing against the living prison. The forest hissed and howled, but I refused to surrender. With a final, desperate heave, I ripped free. Gasping, bruised, I stumbled into the darkness beyond the clearing. The whispers followed, a relentless tide. But in the darkest depths of my mind, a sliver of hope glimmered. Darkness wasn't just around me anymore, it had seeped inside my skull, pooling behind my eyes, thick and heavy like spilled ink. The forest's whispers had transformed, no longer distant voices but invasive thoughts that burrowed under my skin, entwining with my memories until I couldn't tell what was real and what was conjured from madness. I sat beneath a twisted tree, its bark slick and pulsating as if it had a heartbeat of its own. My hands trembled as I tried to hold on to the fragments of my mind, but they slipped through my fingers like smoke. I remembered Emma. Her bright smile, the way her hand felt warm in mine before she disappeared. But the memory fragmented too, splintering into dark pieces. In some visions, her eyes were vacant, black as the void. In others, she was a stranger, a shadow flickering just out of reach. The forest grew louder inside my head. Images surged like tides, flickering scenes of children wandering lost paths, faces morphing into grotesque masks, mouths open in silent screams. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My throat was dry, parched as if the forest had swallowed my voice whole. I twisted my head, desperate to escape the storm of images. But the forest's grip was absolute. My own reflection stared back at me from a pool of stagnant water nearby, but it wasn't me. It was a fractured version, a mirror cracked into a dozen shards. Each shard showed a different self, terrified, angry, broken, mad. They whispered. They pleaded. They threatened. Give in, join us, be free. The voices invaded every corner of my consciousness. The line between my thoughts and the forests was dissolved. I no longer knew where I ended and it began. A memory surfaced, one so vivid it seared through the haze. Emma, standing at the forest's edge, calling to me. But her voice was warped, distant, as if coming from underwater. She begged me to come in, to stay, to become part of the forest, to belong. I shook my head violently, trying to expel the vision. My heart hammered, blood pounding in my ears. The oppressive silence shattered as the forest's breath surrounded me, cold and clammy, a living presence pressing against my skin. I wasn't alone. A figure emerged from the shadows, indistinct, shimmering at the edge of my vision. It flickered like a candle flame caught in a draft. For a moment, I thought it was Emma. Then the figure smiled, a cruel, twisted grin that wasn't hers. It spoke without moving its lips. You're ours now. The forest never forgets. You will serve. The ground beneath me began to pulse with a sickening rhythm, like a heartbeat counting down to something inevitable. My mind screamed, struggled, fractured, but the darkness was absolute. I realized then, the forest's true horror wasn't just physical. It was the slow, agonizing dissolution of self. A consuming madness that left only empty shells, trapped forever in the whispering woods. I closed my eyes, trying to hold on to the fading spark inside me, the part that remembered who I was before the forest began to claim me. But the shadows were patient. And I was running out of time. The night was alive. A thick fog crept low over the ground, curling around gnarled roots like restless fingers. The trees stood like ancient sentinels, their twisted limbs reaching up to choke the sky, blotting out stars and moon alike. The silence was thick. Not peaceful, but heavy, expectant, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Each step I took sank deep into the soft earth, muffled by moss and fallen leaves damp with decay. The air was cold but suffocating, dense with the scent of damp wood, rotting leaves, and something far fouler I couldn't name, something sharp and metallic that made my skin crawl. Ahead, a narrow path slithered between the trees, barely visible in the gloom. It pulsed faintly, like a vein in the forest's flesh, beckoning me deeper. I hesitated, heart hammering, then pushed forward. Every rustle, every crack of a twig beneath my boots made my blood run cold. Shadows shifted at the edge of my vision, just beyond the reach of my trembling flashlight beam. A sudden movement caught my eye, something darting between the trees. I froze, breath caught in my throat. The forest seemed to pulse around me, alive and watching. Then came the sound. Low. Wet. A slithering, dragging noise like something heavy being pulled across the ground. I turned, shining the light behind me. The beam caught on something, a tangle of pale limbs and dark hair sprawled across the underbrush. The body was twisted unnaturally, broken at odd angles, skin mottled and slick with damp earth and something darker. I swallowed hard, stomach churning. This was no accident or animal kill. This was ritual. The scent of blood was thick now, iron sharp, mixing with the damp forest air. I backed away slowly, the forest closing in like a trap. The path behind me was swallowed by the mist, vanishing as if it had never been. Panic clawed up my throat. Ahead, a flicker of movement, a figure standing just beyond the trees. still, silent, watching. It was a child. Or at least, it looked like one. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, unblinking and empty. I raised my flashlight, the beam trembling. The figure didn't move, but I felt its gaze pierce through me like ice. A whisper floated on the wind, barely audible but unmistakable. 1 year. Then return. The figure faded into the mist, leaving only a cold, hollow silence in its wake. The forest breathed again, slow and deep, as if settling back into its eternal watch. I was still trapped inside its grasp. The forest had become a poison seeping through my veins, infecting every corner of my being. I was no longer just walking beneath its towering, suffocating canopy. I was imprisoned inside its gnarled roots and twisted branches, trapped within a living nightmare that clawed at my soul. Sleep was a distant memory. Each time I closed my eyes, the shadows came alive. Instead of rest, I descended into an endless labyrinth of darkness and whispering trees. Their bark was no longer rough and lifeless, but slick with something wet and cold, like the skin of a drowned thing. The branches scraped against invisible walls, scratching like desperate fingernails trying to tear free. I was running, no, falling, through tangled underbrush that shifted and writhed beneath my feet like a living thing. The earth pulsed, breathing beneath me. Every breath I took was thick with the metallic taste of blood, heavy with the scent of decay and damp earth. It filled my lungs and clotted my thoughts. And then the voices. Soft, barely audible at first, like the rustling of dead leaves on the forest floor. Remember. Remember, the words echoed endlessly, bouncing off the hollow chambers in my skull. They twisted into a chant, a maddening litany that clawed its way into my consciousness. I reached out with shaking hands to grasp the source, but the voices slipped away, vanishing like smoke through my fingers. Each one carried a distinct hue of emotion. Anguish so deep it made my chest ache, fury sharp enough to slice through bone, and a sorrow so vast it felt as though it might drown me whole. In the darkest recesses of my mind, I saw them, faces. Fragmented reflections of the children who had vanished. Their eyes were endless pits of despair, mouths frozen in silent screams that reverberated through the void. They were trapped, bound by roots I could neither see nor touch. I stumbled through this mental forest, desperate to hold on to something real, something solid. But even my reflection betrayed me. I stared into a cracked mirror, and the face looking back was not mine. It was fractured into countless shards, each shard revealing a different version of myself. One shard showed a boy wide-eyed with terror, trembling as the shadows closed in. Another shard reflected a hollow-eyed stranger whose lips curled into a cruel smile. Yet another showed a broken figure, slumped and bleeding, lost in endless night. They whispered to me in chorus, their voices overlapping, each word a dagger. Give in, join us, be free. I wanted to scream, to fight, but my voice was gone, stolen by the forest that now dwelled within me. My body was still, but my mind shattered, shards scattering in every direction. Time lost meaning. Days blurred into nights, nights folded into nightmares, and I drifted on the edge of sanity. The hunger inside me was a gnawing void, a relentless ache that only grew stronger with each passing moment away from the forest's embrace. They promised release, belonging, freedom. But all I felt was the slow, grinding fracture of my identity, splintering piece by piece until I was nothing but a hollow shell haunted by whispering ghosts. And the forest was patient. It waited for me to fall. I closed my eyes again, clutching the last fragile thread of myself. But the darkness was endless. And I was already losing. The mirror of my mind cracked wider with every passing moment. I felt the edges of who I was fray, unraveling like a threadbare tapestry left too long beneath the rain. The person I knew, the child who had walked into the forest seeking answers, was slipping away, drowning beneath waves of creeping darkness. Inside me, thoughts no longer came in whole sentences. They splintered, fractured into disjointed images and fleeting sensations. I reached for memories, but they slipped like wet stones, smooth and uncatchable. I tried to recall the taste of Emma's laughter, the warmth of her hand in mine, but all I could summon was a hollow echo, a faint ringing that faded before it fully formed. Even her face blurred, her eyes melting into pools of shadow. My reflection became a battleground. Sometimes, it was me, a flicker of familiarity in the abyss. But more often, it was a stranger wearing my skin, eyes hollow and unfocused, lips twisted into a fragile, uncertain smile. Voices clawed at the edges of my consciousness, snatches of conversation, fractured phrases that echoed with cruel familiarity. You don't belong out here. We are the forest. You are ours. Come back. Come back. The lines between my own thoughts and theirs dissolved. I would wake with foreign memories, moments I didn't live, places I never saw. Haunting fragments that felt as real as my own past. I found myself lost in my own mind, wandering through fog-thickened corridors lined with shadows that whispered and beckoned. Sleep offered no refuge. Instead, it was a liminal realm where reality bent and twisted. Dreams bled into waking hours, dragging with them grotesque images, a child's scream stretched thin and endless, hands clawing at the earth, faces melting into twisted masks of grief and rage. Sometimes, I caught glimpses of myself in these visions, eyes wide and wild, body twitching and convulsing as if fighting some unseen force. I was both observer and prisoner, trapped behind a glass wall that grew thicker every day. The hunger inside was a ravenous beast, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. It demanded release, release into the endless night, the whispering shadows, the cold embrace of the roots that promised escape from the pain of being me. But somewhere, deep within the splintered fragments, a faint spark of resistance flickered. A thread of me that refused to be swallowed whole. I clung to it desperately, even as the forest's breath pressed heavier against my chest. And I knew. I was losing. The forest had changed again. Not just the endless twilight and choking fog, but something far older, far crueler. I could feel it in the air. A suffocating weight, like the earth itself, was pressing down on my chest, grinding away the last scraps of sanity. The trees no longer just loomed, they watched. Their twisted limbs bent into shapes too grotesque to name, faces pressed into the bark with hollow, empty eyes and mouths agape in silent screams. Some seemed to move when I wasn't looking, inching closer with slow, deliberate intent. I stumbled upon a clearing, bathed in an unnatural, sickly green light that pulsed like a heartbeat. In its center stood a circle of stones, ancient and weathered, covered in strange carvings that twisted and writhed under my gaze. And inside that circle, children. Not children as I remembered them, but hollow shells, empty vessels wrapped in decayed skin stretched tight over bones. Their eyes were dark pits, mouths frozen in silent cries, limbs bent at unnatural angles as if puppeteered by unseen strings. They moved slowly, mechanically, their heads tilting as they watched me with that dreadful emptiness. I wanted to turn away, but my legs refused. I was rooted, trapped by the forest's cruel spell. One of them stepped forward, its gaze locking onto mine. I saw a flicker, a shard of recognition, a spark of the child it once was. Before it vanished, swallowed by the abyss within. The air thickened. Whispers rose like a chorus, chanting in a language older than the trees, vibrating through my bones. Return. Become. Join us. I wanted to scream, to run, but the forest's grip tightened like a noose. The stones around the circle began to glow, the carvings shifting into grotesque symbols that burned into my vision. The hollow children began to move faster, their movements jerky and unnatural, circling me, closing in like predators. I was alone, trapped in a nightmare where the past and present blurred, where children disappeared only to return as these hollow husks, cursed and claimed by the forest. And I knew then that the forest's hunger was far from sated. My heart was a wild, frantic drum in my chest, pounding so loud I feared it would burst through my ribs. Every breath came ragged and shallow, as if the air itself had turned to ash. I was trapped beneath a sky smeared with sickly green light, encircled by those hollow children, those twisted echoes of innocence lost. Their empty eyes bore into me like needles, threading dread through my veins. A crushing weight pressed down on my chest, stealing my breath and twisting my gut into tight knots. Panic rose in bitter waves, each crashing harder than the last until I was gasping, clinging desperately to whatever scraps of calm I could find. But calm was a lie. A fragile veneer cracking beneath the pressure. Memories shattered inside me, flashes of faces I could no longer trust, laughter twisted into screams, love turned to ash. I blinked away tears that burned like acid, fingers trembling as I fought the suffocating urge to collapse. My voice caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, to tear myself free, but I was rooted here, held fast by terror and something darker. Each hollow child was a mirror, reflecting pieces of my own fractured soul. I saw myself in their lifeless gaze, lost, empty, consumed. My mind spiraled. Was I next? Was I already slipping beneath their spell, becoming one of the hollow? I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to block out the whispers clawing at the edges of my sanity. Join us. Let go. The voices weren't outside anymore, they were inside, a relentless echo bouncing in the hollow chambers of my mind. I was both prisoner and prey, caught in a slow unraveling with no clear end. And yet, somewhere beneath the storm of fear, a flicker of defiance sparked. A desperate, fragile thread of self. I would not go quietly. The weight of the forest's whispering presence clung to me like a second skin, heavy and suffocating. Every breath I took was filtered through a fog of dread and fractured memories. My mind wasn't a sanctuary anymore, it was a battleground, the echoes of those hollow children clawing at the edges, urging surrender, while a tiny, stubborn part of me fought to stay whole. I woke that morning with sweat slicking my skin, heart still hammering as if I'd been running in my sleep. The room around me felt alien, shadows stretching too long, light flickering in ways that shouldn't be possible. I blinked rapidly, trying to force clarity, but the haze remained, like a veil drawn tight between me and reality. I tried to move, to shake off the remnants of that suffocating dream. But every step felt uncertain, as if my body was betraying me. I caught myself staring into reflective surfaces, searching for the face I knew. Desperate to find a flicker of the person I was before the forest burrowed inside me. The simplest tasks became mountains, making coffee, opening a window, stepping outside. Each action was punctuated by waves of dizziness and a creeping sense of unreality. Sometimes my hands trembled so badly I dropped things, cups shattered, papers scattered, the sharp noise slicing through the silence like a scream. I found myself pacing the floor in erratic loops, pulled by a restless energy I couldn't explain. My thoughts raced, circling the same dark images again and again, the hollow children, their empty eyes, the pulsing green light of the stone circle. And yet, I was haunted by doubts. Had those children really been there? Or was it a hallucination spawned by my fracturing mind? The question gnawed at me relentlessly. I tried to reach out to others, to Emma, to anyone. But words stuck in my throat, tangled with fear and shame. The faces I saw when I forced my gaze into the mirror seemed to mock me, broken and haunted, not the person I wanted to be. At times, I felt a sinister presence lurking just behind my thoughts, nudging me toward dark corners of memory I wished to forget. I caught myself staring blankly for minutes, trapped in the spiderweb of my mind, pulled closer to a place where the line between nightmare and waking life blurred. One afternoon, the urge became unbearable. I found myself drawn back to the forest's edge, the boundary where daylight met shadow. With shaking hands, I stepped beneath the trees once more. The air grew thick and cold, pressing against my skin like icy fingers. Branches creaked overhead, whispering in a language older than words. My heart thundered, but I kept moving, one fractured step at a time. Every sound echoed. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird that never came. My skin prickled, nerves taut as if the forest itself was watching, waiting. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet betrayed me, moving deeper into the shadowed woods. I was both hunter and prey, chasing something I could not name, running from the emptiness growing inside me. And with each step, I felt the cracks widen, the line between me and the forest blur further. The forest wasn't just a place anymore, it was a presence, a heavy, pressing weight that followed me, creeping into every corner of my existence. My thoughts were no longer my own, they were stitched together with threads of fear and confusion that pulled tighter every day. After my reluctant return to the forest edge, the days that followed slipped into a bizarre limbo. I moved through the world like a ghost, disconnected from time, space, and even my own body. Simple conversations felt like riddles I couldn't solve. When Emma asked how I was, I stared, my mind scrambling for words that refused to form. She looked at me with worried eyes, but I was trapped in a cage of silence. At night, the whispers came back. Not just faint murmurs, but voices that clawed through the darkness with a sharpness that made my skin crawl. I could feel them sliding under my skin, burrowing deeper each time I closed my eyes. Sometimes I thought I saw figures moving just beyond my vision, twisted, blurred shapes that vanished the moment I focused on them. Shadows flickered at the edges of rooms, faces melting into walls. My hands would twitch involuntarily, trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. I found myself compulsively touching objects, tapping rhythms into the worn wood of tables or tracing patterns into the dust on windowsills, as if trying to anchor myself to something real. But reality was slipping. One evening, I awoke in a cold sweat, heart pounding, gasping as if I'd been drowning. My room was thick with a dark, choking fog that didn't belong. Shapes shifted in the mist, slender limbs stretching, faces twisted in agony. I scrambled for the light switch, hands shaking so hard I fumbled, plunging the room back into darkness. I tried to scream, but only a strangled whisper escaped. When dawn finally bled through the curtains, I was left with a growing certainty. The forest had invaded my mind, but now it was spreading. The boundaries between inside and outside, self and shadow, were dissolving. Desperation clawed at me. I needed to move, to do something, anything, before I vanished completely. And so, despite every fiber of my being screaming to stay away, I stepped again into the dark embrace of the woods. With each step, the forest's breath grew colder, its whisper louder, until it was no longer just a place. It was a sickness inside me, infecting every thought, every motion. I didn't know if I was walking toward salvation or oblivion. All I knew was I couldn't stop. The forest wasn't just a place I visited anymore. It had become a living thing inside me, a relentless presence that consumed every waking moment and bled into my dreams. When I was outside the woods, the air tasted stale and hollow, as if the forest's shadows had followed me into the world of light. I found myself wandering alone, trapped between two worlds. The forest's dark breath was always at my back, whispering secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. I felt its fingers curling around my mind, tightening with every thought I tried to grasp. The nights were the worst. Alone in my small, dim room, I was haunted by the silence, and the things that grew within it. I could hear the faint rustle of leaves beneath my window, slow and deliberate. Sometimes I thought I saw shapes drifting past, half-seen figures lurking just beyond the glass. Sleep came as a bitter stranger. When I closed my eyes, the forest's grip tightened. I'd fall into a deep, choking darkness, where my own voice was swallowed by a chorus of others, echoes of children long lost, their hollow eyes pressing through the veil of night. Dreams became nightmares that bled into waking hours. I could feel the ground beneath me shift, the roots twisting beneath the earth like the coils of a great serpent. Time fractured, minutes stretched into hours, hours collapsed into seconds. I lost track of myself in a swirl of fog and shadow. During the day, I tried to anchor myself with routine. I moved through the motions, eating, dressing, walking, but it was like going through life behind a thick glass wall. Every sound was muffled, every touch felt distant and unreal. The forest called to me relentlessly. Its pulse thrummed in my veins, cold and demanding. It seeped into my bones, gnawing at the fragile edges of my sanity. One afternoon, I found myself standing again at the forest's edge, staring into the yawning dark. My hands were shaking, sweat slick on my palms. The scent of damp earth and decay filled the air, thick and heavy like a shroud. I wanted to step back, to run. But my feet moved forward, drawn by something I couldn't name. A hunger that wasn't mine. Inside the trees, shadows shifted. I heard faint, disjointed laughter, high and brittle, like glass breaking. It wrapped around me, seeping into my skin, threading into my very blood. I stumbled through tangled underbrush, heart pounding, senses fraying. Every crack of a twig, every whisper of wind sounded like a threat. At times, I would stop and press my palm to the rough bark of an ancient tree, feeling its cold pulse beneath my fingers. It was alive. Watching. Waiting. And somewhere, deep in the dark, I felt eyes on me. Not human. Not kind. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat, strangled by the weight of the forest's gaze. Exhausted, broken, I collapsed against a gnarled root, breathing ragged, tears carving paths down my dirt-smudged face. In that moment, I realized I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The moments when I encountered other people were like brief flashes of light in a long, unending darkness. Sharp, disorienting, and somehow even more terrifying than the solitude. Each interaction felt like stepping onto a fragile bridge stretched thin over a yawning abyss. One wrong move, and I would fall back into the forest's cold grip. That afternoon, I found myself in the small town's diner, one of the few places where faces lingered, voices hummed, and the mundane world stubbornly persisted. But even here, I was an intruder, a ghost drifting between realities. Emma was behind the counter. Her smile was faint, tentative, as if she sensed I was unraveling and wasn't sure how to reach me. I forced a nod, a whispered hello, but the words felt foreign in my throat, like swallowing broken glass. She watched me carefully, her eyes darting to the tremble in my hands, the wildness lurking beneath my gaze. "You look tired," she said softly. "You should rest." Rest. The word felt like a cruel joke. Rest meant retreating into a nightmare I couldn't escape. I picked at my coffee, the bitter liquid burning my tongue, trying to ground myself in something solid. But the din of the room faded, and beneath it, I heard the forest's whisper again, a susurrus threading through the hum of voices like a poisonous wind. Across the room, a child laughed, a brittle, hollow sound that made my blood run cold. I turned sharply, but the room was empty of anything but ordinary people. Still, the echo lingered, like a ghost's breath on my neck. My skin prickled. The forest was here, in the mundane, bleeding through the cracks. Later, outside, I crossed paths with a man I vaguely recognized from the town. He greeted me with a wary smile, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't place, fear, recognition, or something darker. "Been to the woods lately?" he asked, voice low, almost a warning. I swallowed hard, the words thick in my throat. "Yes, I managed." He nodded, his gaze dropping to the ground. "Be careful. Things there, they change you." His words sank into me like cold stones. They echoed what I already feared, that the forest was not just a place of shadows, but a force that reshaped those it touched, twisting mind and body until you were no longer yourself. That night, back in my room, I was haunted anew. The darkness seemed to breathe around me, the air thick with a choking presence. I heard scratching at the window, fingernails raking against glass, sharp and urgent. I pressed my hand to the cold pane, heart hammering. The shapes outside twisted and convulsed, faces melting into grotesque masks, eyes bleeding shadows. I wanted to scream but found only silence. The room grew colder, darker, until I was trapped in a cocoon of dread. Then, from the shadows, a whisper. "You belong to us now." I clenched my fists, fighting the wave of terror that threatened to consume me. But the forest was patient. It knew I was breaking. And somewhere deep inside, I wondered if I wanted to be broken. Isolation was no longer a state, it was the very air I breathed, thick and suffocating. The world outside blurred into an indistinct haze, as if I were watching life through a cracked, rain-streaked window. Every attempt to reach for normalcy slipped away like sand through trembling fingers. The forest's presence pulsed relentlessly beneath my skin, an unyielding rhythm that no amount of distraction could drown out. It was a slow, grinding pressure that carved away pieces of me with surgical precision, memories, emotions, identity, until all that remained was raw, exposed nerve. I found myself awake at odd hours, eyes wide and darting through the darkness, heart hammering like a frantic drumbeat. Shadows morphed and writhed at the edges of my vision, twisting into grotesque shapes that whispered in voices both alien and achingly familiar. Once, I swore I saw a child's face pressed against my bedroom window, pale, hollow-eyed, lips moving silently in a pleading, incomprehensible language. When I blinked, it vanished, leaving only the lingering chill of its gaze. I stopped trusting my own senses. The smell of damp earth and moss followed me everywhere, even in the sterile light of day. At times, I felt the texture of bark beneath my fingertips when nothing was there, heard footsteps echoing behind me down empty streets. My reflection in the mirror grew stranger each day. The eyes staring back were sunken, rimmed with shadows that no sleep could erase. Sometimes the face shifted, smiling cruelly, sneering, or splitting into a grin too wide and unnatural for a human mouth. The boundary between dream and waking dissolved. I would awaken trapped beneath heavy branches, tangled in roots that seemed to pulse like veins. The forest whispered secrets I could barely understand, words that tasted like ash and sorrow. My body grew frail, but my mind raced uncontrollably. I felt as though dozens of voices spoke inside my skull, some pleading, others mocking, all fracturing my sense of self into shards too sharp to hold. Sometimes, in moments of brief lucidity, I'd write frantic notes to myself, scraps of sanity pinned to the walls of my unraveling mind. Words like, "Remember who you are," and "Do not trust the whispers." But even those words began to fade, smudged by tears and time. Outside, the world felt hostile and distant. The townspeople's eyes followed me with suspicion, their voices hushed when I passed. I could sense a growing gulf between myself and everything I once knew. I wanted to scream, to run, to fight. But my limbs felt heavy, like I was wading through thick, cold water. One night, as rain hammered against the window panes, I heard a soft scratching at my door, fingernails dragging slowly, deliberately. My breath caught in my throat as the sound grew louder, more insistent. I pressed my back against the cold wall, hands shaking, heart threatening to burst. The door trembled beneath the scratching, as if something desperate wanted in. And then silence. A silence so absolute it screamed. I realized then, the forest was no longer outside. It was inside. In every corner of my mind, in every shadow of my body. It had taken root. And it would never let go. The town was a cage, and I was trapped inside its rusted bars. After so long swallowed by the forest's grasp, stepping back into the town felt like surfacing from deep underwater. Everything was sharper, louder, but dangerously unstable. The world tilted beneath me, threatening to drown me in its normalcy. Main Street stretched out in front of me, the storefronts dim and faded as if the sun itself feared to linger there. The cracked pavement was slick from a recent rain, reflecting the dull glow of flickering street lamps that cast long, trembling shadows. The air tasted metallic, heavy with the scent of damp wood and old smoke. People moved like ghosts through the streets, eyes downcast, voices hushed, smiles brittle and fleeting. I caught snippets of their whispers when I passed, the disappearances, the forest's claim, another one lost. Their words clung to me like poison. I felt their gazes, sharp and cold, prying into my every movement. I was no longer one of them, not really. A living reminder of the forest's cruelty, a warning wrapped in flesh. The diner where Emma worked was the only place that felt faintly familiar, yet even there, the warmth had thinned to a fragile, trembling pulse. Emma greeted me with cautious eyes, her smile strained but genuine. She slid a coffee cup toward me, her fingers brushing mine. Too brief, yet enough to send a jolt through my numbness. "People are talking," she said quietly, voice barely above the hum of the room. "What about?" I managed, swallowing the lump in my throat. She glanced around, voice dropping to a whisper. "About the children. About the ones who come back, and the ones who never do." Her words echoed the unspoken dread pulsing beneath the town's surface. I wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but the fear lurking in her eyes stopped me. Outside the diner, the sky was bruised with the onset of evening. I walked the streets alone, every step a reminder of the widening gulf between me and the world I once knew. The houses stood silent, their windows darkened like eyes refusing to meet mine. Doors were shut tight, as if the town itself was barricading against the unseen horror lurking beyond. At the edge of town, the forest loomed, an impenetrable wall of twisted trunks and tangled branches. It breathed, exhaled cold shadows that slithered through the streets, creeping into the cracks of sidewalks and seeping into the soil beneath the town's foundations. I felt it pressing in from all sides, a living thing hungry for more. Later, as night thickened, I found myself at the church on the hill, a lonely sentinel overlooking the town. The bell tower stood like a fractured tooth against the starless sky, its silence a dark promise. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and stale incense. Pews sagged under the weight of years, and stained glass windows shattered the dim light into fractured shards of color that danced across the cracked stone floor. I sank into a pew, hands trembling, mind reeling. The silence around me was thick and watchful, as if the walls themselves held secrets too terrible to speak. In that stillness, the forest's whispers returned, threading through the shadows, curling around my thoughts with serpentine grace. I was alone. And the town was watching.